What's interesting to me about this is that this woman, Francine Shapiro, in the late 70s, early 80s, she was a psychologist who noticed something as she was taking a walk where her eyes would kind of like spontaneously go back and forth as she was recalling some memories. And I'd like you to think about yourselves for a second when you're thinking about something. Like, I often am kind of looking up that way if I'm trying to remember something, and then I'll kind of look down, and then I'll look up again. And what she noticed is that when this was happening and she was simultaneously thinking about a difficult thing in her life, she kind of felt better. And just because she's kind of inquisitive and very smart, I think she systematically started using this with some of the clients that she was working with, where she would deliberately ask them to move their eyes back and forth as they were recalling difficult things. And again, clients were responding very quickly, reporting that they were just feeling much better. She thought that it was a bit of a fluke, as far as I know, but she systematically started to study this and refine an approach so that it ultimately became what's today known as EMDR. It is a very simple idea, but it has a profound effect. What we just talked about with PTSD is that people will kind of get on a loop where they're reliving the difficult event again and again, and they don't seem to get past it. What EMDR asks a person to do is, while they are recalling a difficult or the difficult event, they're getting some sort of stimulus for the brain that recognizes that you are here in the moment, as opposed to being allowed to dissociate back into the memory. So by moving your eyes back and forth, or some people will tap on the knees, you can even use earphones that kind of have an alternating beep. I have an injury that I can't make people's eyes move back and forth, so I have these little hand paddles that will vibrate back and forth. It turns out that the brain has to do this really interesting calculation. When it's remembering the past, this really difficult, awful thing, but getting this signal that it's kind of in the here and now, it has to kind of put the old memory in its proper place. And so just by giving it this opportunity to kind of reorganize things, EMDR is often very quick and very effective at helping with PTSD, because the therapy part actually is very non-conscious. It's happening sort of in the background. What I think is amazing about this, and just as a personal sort of anecdote about this, I was teaching the Dreams and Dreaming course here for a number of years. When I was trying to keep the course updated, I would kind of look into recent research on dreaming, and what everybody was starting to conclude was that dreams are very much related to memory processing. And in particular, REM stage sleep is related to memory processing and also emotional processing. It turns out it's exposure therapy every night that you go to sleep. So you're basically reliving certain events. Your brain will kind of change it a little bit and kind of make bizarre things happen. But the feelings of the dream are always very right on. They're always very exacting about how you're feeling in your life in general. So anyway, we experience dreams at night, and then we wake up more refreshed in the morning, and it's kind of like we're just ready to go and face another day. When we go through trauma, though, it turns out that that flood of adrenaline that we experience as the normal path for our fight or flight response, it turns out that that interferes with memory implantation. And so the dream researchers and the EMDR researchers, it turns out they started to conclude a couple of the same things without ever talking to one another. And I just stumbled across this when I had to do some later training to renew my license, and I picked EMDR as the topic. And as I sat and I listened to the lecture on this topic, I was shocked that everything that they were saying was all of the stuff that I was teaching in my Dreams and Dreaming class. So to me, that's something that's pretty powerful in terms of research, because you don't get a lot of agreement sometimes. Anyway, EMDR really is just tapping into a mechanism that seems to be built into us that helps us get past difficult times. And as the research goes, EMDR has more research for its effectiveness than any other approach, at least to this point that I'm aware of. That doesn't mean that it's the only way, and I'll talk about that very briefly at the end. But if you think about a spider web as kind of an example of how our memories work, let's say that you go through something that's kind of difficult early in your life. We'll call that like a touchstone memory. Well, as your life progresses, you might go through some things that are kind of similar. Like, let's say as a little kid you were abandoned or lost in a grocery store accidentally from your parents, and you were scared like anything. That's a little bit of a wound that your brain is designed to remember so that it can protect you every time that something like that might happen again. Now, if that one event happened and that was it, it probably wouldn't be a big moment. We would get past it, we would learn what we need to, and we'd move on. But let's say something in your life happens when you're abandoned again and again and again. These memories, they start to cluster together, sort of in like a memory circuit. We are more likely to get stuck in that negative way of thinking every time we get re-injured that way. So think of yourself, if you're kind of particularly sensitive to some things, is it because maybe you've had some of those injuries previously in life? And every time that nerve gets hit, you kind of feel extra insecure. Well, with PTSD, it's probably very much the same thing. We'll get traumatized again and again. The truth of the matter is, though, there are a lot of memories stored up here where we got through difficult times and we were okay. So these green dots, these are moments when we were resilient. What happens with PTSD, though, is that this memory circuit of the negative stuff, it seems to be a little closed. It's almost like we get stuck in it and we forget that there are other positive parts to our life. The whole goal, though, of EMDR and any other therapy probably is really trying to get people to recognize that there are many moments in life where we were resilient. We got through things. And these moments that were bad, they're really just a part of a whole network of memories where, well, we're okay. And it means that we can have difficult times happen, but also positive times. And we can get through it in a way where we don't have to have that lingering self-punishment that a lot of PTSD seems to be about. So it's about integrating all the good and bad memories in our life and really just allowing ourselves to have them all as memories, but not get stuck in them. So anyway, that's the EMDR approach in a nutshell. There are other treatments, obviously, right? So the traditional medication approach. A lot of people have problems with this because there seem to be a lot of side effects, so then you kind of have to take medications for the medications. Every documentary that I've watched about, let's say, a former serviceman on medication, this does not seem to be the most effective way to go. It doesn't seem to cure anything, because again, if the real issue is some sort of shame or guilt maybe associated with all this, you have to access that differently. You're not going to be able to mask it.
You'll become dependent on that for the rest of your life.
Probably, right. And I think it also addresses symptoms where it doesn't actually fix the issue, right? Now, there's a lot of controversy about marijuana, right? So I don't advocate, I don't deny, but there's a lot of looking into this now, especially as it's becoming more legalized in places. It does seem to have an effect, and I do know this because in my practice, I noticed that a lot of young people who use marijuana as a way of getting comfortable with their negative feelings. For young people, that means it's a good recipe to get stuck, though, right? Your feelings are there to tell you something's supposed to change. So marijuana kind of gets you comfortable with your pain. So you're actually just gonna, I don't know, kind of sit in your pain. Maybe for somebody going through PTSD that feels better, at least you can tolerate what's going on better. At least in my practice, it tends to be something that gets in the way. Anyway, and then there's traditional talk therapy, obviously. So maybe the idea is that whatever fits for whatever client is really the best route to go, right? I think the whole point of this is that PTSD is very real. It is not a made-up diagnosis. It says nothing about a person's strength or whether there's anything really wrong with them, and it's highly treatable. So I think in reality, with PTSD, if the treatment of PTSD needs to change in any way, it's that people recognize that seeking help actually says nothing about you, except that you're addressing the problem, which actually sounds like a really positive thing. So anyway, if anybody has any questions, I'm easy to contact. I teach here on Saturday mornings almost all the time. Seriously, give me a call. You can email me, and I'll be glad to help in whatever way I can. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.